What's going on YouTube? Welcome back everyone, this is Lee, and yes, today's the day we'll be taking a look at the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lens. So with all that said, let's begin. So right before we get started, I just want to first point out that Viltrox, they did send this lens over to me for evaluation, and as usual, all opinions are my own opinions about the product. And also in this video, we'll definitely get into the spec of the lens and also compare it with of course, the 28mm f4.5 on the Nikon. So with that in mind, with the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lens, this lens right here is a full frame, not manual, it's an autofocus lens. Look how thin this thing is. It is very thin. If you compare it to the Nikon right here, it is very thin. This is craziness right here. By the way, this lens is a 4.5 fixed, so that means you cannot go anywhere else but 4.5. You're stuck at 4.5 forever. Now the lens is very thin and light, as you can see. You can fit this in your pocket. There's no bulge to it at all. It's like a lens cap pretty much. And so with that in mind, this lens comes with a built-in lens cover, as you can see. Pretty nice. It's made out of full metal, and at the back of the unit, you get your USB-C right there. And also the front of the lens is splash resistant. Now this lens, there is no manual focusing on this lens at all. So just keep that in mind. Also, there is no weather resistance on this lens. And also, of course, being this thin, there is no IS or VR built in the lens. So with that in mind, if you take a closer look at the front of the lens, you'll notice that there's also no thread for filters. So that is another thing you guys should definitely consider before purchasing this particular lens. And also the autofocus. Let me show you guys some demonstrations side by side with the Nikon 20mm lens. Now in good lighting condition, this is what the autofocus looks like. As you can see, the Viltrox slightly focus breathes when you're focusing on your subject, whereas the Nikon does not focus breathe. So it's kind of like a smooth transition on the Nikon, whereas the Viltrox, it's just a tad split second slower due to the focus breathing on the lens. And in low light, you'll see that as well, but it's slightly slower on the Viltrox, as you can see with the Tetris tracking. The Nikon does not have the Tetris tracking when it comes to focusing in the low light situation. Now for the vignetting, as you can see, Viltrox has more vignetting on the Nikon. However, later on in the video, we'll definitely take a look at the photo images with and without the vignetting on the Viltrox. So stay tuned for that. Now in terms of distortion, it's very subtle. It's not that major. Also, as you can clearly see, the Viltrox is slightly zoomed in over the Nikon. So that's just something for you guys to know. It looks like it could be maybe a 29, 30mm lens, depends, right? So yeah, just something for you guys to definitely take your notes on. Now in terms of the bokeh, even in this test, you can see the heavy vignetting. You can see the Viltrox slightly closer than the Nikon, but in terms of bokeh balls, in my honest opinion, it looks more or less the same. Now in terms of blurry background, the f4.5 on both lenses, you can still get blurry backgrounds. As you can see, if we take a closer look at the dead center on this plant, the details look quite identical. I mean, there is no huge difference between the Viltrox or the Nikon, but if you take a look at the blurry background, they look more or less the same. Now as for the next test, this is the flare test plus the chromatic aberration test. As you can clearly see, the sun is right in front of me, and definitely the Viltrox will give you that flare characteristics, whereas the Nikon doesn't give you that at all. And also a side note, there is no lens hood on either lens, so this is what it looks like. Now here is the exact same scene at a different angle. I'm trying to get the starburst shot, but I don't seem that I succeeded. I turn on the lens correction, lift up the shadows, and the starburst is kind of there, kind of not there, but definitely there's no chromatic aberration anywhere that I could see. But the starburst, I couldn't show you guys a good sample of it, but here is a sample if you're shooting direct at the sun. Now as for this next scene, I'm shooting direct at the bush. The sun is like on my top mid left somewhere, but as you can see, when you're using a Viltrox, it gives you slightly more characteristics over the Nikon. Nikon is basically clinically clean, it's just sharp, it's good to go, whereas the Viltrox, you get that film look, you get that slight burst of purple from the lens flare, and also the vignetting just brings it out. It feels like I'm shooting with a film camera at this point. Now for the first test, I'm going to turn on lens correction on the Viltrox, and we'll go through each part of the image. Here is the top left corner of the image. I would say that the Nikon seems to be slightly sharper than the Viltrox. Here is the top mid portion of the image. I will say that it looks very identical, but if you look very, very closely, if you're pixel peeping like crazy, maybe Nikon is slightly sharper, of course. And if you look at the top right of the image, the Nikon seems to be maybe slightly, just a tad sharper than the Viltrox. But if you take a look at the bottom left, the Viltrox is sharper than the Nikon. Bottom mid, I would say that the Viltrox and Nikon look very identical, but I will give it to the Nikon. Also, the bottom right, it's more or less the same. Nikon seems to be just a tad sharper than the Viltrox. Now here is my second scene. As you can see, I'm also turned on the lens correction on the Viltrox, and let's take a look at the top left corner. It looks like Nikon is slightly sharper than the Viltrox in the corners. Top mid seems to be almost actually identical, just about. Center sharpness on Viltrox, not bad at all. Top right, I would say it looks just a tad sharper on the Nikon, just very subtle. You can't even tell, but it's very subtle. Bottom left, for some reason, Viltrox is sharper than Nikon at the bottom left. Bottom mid, it looks very identical, but I will say Nikon might be a tad sharper than the Viltrox. And the bottom right, I would say Nikon is just a tad sharper than the Viltrox. Now here is the last scene. I turn on the lens correction again for the Viltrox, and let's take a look at the image. Top left, yeah, it looks slightly sharper on the Nikon, just a tad. Top mid, it looks more or less the same, it seems. Maybe a little bit sharper on the Nikon, maybe. Top right, it looks more or less the same as before. The Nikon is slightly sharper than the Viltrox. Bottom left though, Viltrox is just a tad sharper than the Nikon, just a little bit. Bottom mid, it looks more or less the same, but Nikon seems to be slightly sharper than the Viltrox. And of course, bottom right looks like garbage, so don't worry about that. It looks it's just blocked in a way, so apologies about that. So just wrap things up, the Viltrox 20mm f4.5 lens. At the end of the day, if you own this and you're bored with the image quality because it's just clinically just too clean, too sharp, you're looking for something more funner, something more, you know, on the go, compact, look no further. 20mm f4.5 lens. This is a very fun lens, especially when it's this compact. I mean, the lens, you could just slide it in your coat pocket, you could turn off the lens cap, and on top of all of that, it only costs 100 USD. So this lens right here is about 300 USD. So if you're looking for outlet just to go out and shoot without thinking too much, the 4.5, the fixed f4.5 20mm by Viltrox might be the way to go. It does have your typical flare in your, you know, older lenses. It does have the vignetting as well. It does have autofocus. I do wish that it had manual focus at least, but autofocus works just great on this unit. Just gotta be slightly more patient with it. So with all that said, thank you guys for checking me back. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. Definitely click like and subscribe, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next one. All right, take it easy. Peace.